Sometimes life gets in the way, doesn't it? Sometimes, I don't know, you're planning to do a radio interview on an important theological topic, and then the fire alarm goes off in the building that you're in. This is the situation for Dr. Greg Liston. He is a senior lecturer of theology at Laidlaw College. But actually, this may be quite appropriate to the topic today because the topic that Greg has selected is, as a church community, should we stop trying to be so focused on being relevant and perhaps lean into the weirdness of Christianity? Well, Greg, doing a live Zoom call from a fire drill, that's certainly in the weird category, isn't it?
Yeah, Andrew, I don't think I've ever done something quite like this before, but hopefully you can hear me reasonably well. And I don't know, perhaps the analogy is apt.
Yeah.
Perhaps there's some metaphorical significance to the fact that there's a fire alarm going off, and it sort of says this world is in a bad way, and
Yeah,
so
exactly.
us aligning ourselves with the world, maybe a better option is for us to get out and to get away from the world and to be distinct and different from it.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we're going to go down in the fire, Andrew.
Yeah, there's a wonderful metaphor. I'm glad you brought the hellfire and brimstone in at the end there.
Sure,
but
no problem.
just wanting to, I suppose, circle back, and this has been the focus of a lot of churches in recent decades, I suppose. The whole thing of being seeker sensitive, of getting rid of the pews and having like better coffee and perhaps more comfortable seating, and making sure that we're relevant. Desperately trying to be relevant because we look at the census statistics and we're hemorrhaging numbers on a Sunday morning, and we're thinking, oh gosh, maybe Christianity's going to disappear. Turns out that God wasn't worrying what on earth was going to happen next. And things may have gone in a full circle, perhaps.
Yeah. I think that's I think that's exactly the point. And look, it's not to decry any of the good work that people have done, because it's all done with the very best of intentions, and
Yep.
people are wanting to take the gospel to people. The question is fundamentally whether or not the strategy has actually worked.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a famous quote from a British missiologist, Leslie Newbigin, who says, instead of confronting our culture with the gospel, we're perpetually trying to fit the gospel into our culture. And he argues strongly against this idea and says, actually, what we need to do is recognize there are similarities that we have with the culture. There are differences, but the only way people are ever going to see the value of serving our different God is if we lean into the differences we have with the culture,
Yeah.
rather than the similarities. And that's, as you say, that's almost the exact opposite of the strategy that people have adopted pretty much since the 60s in New Zealand churches. So my suggestion, controversial as it may be, perhaps it would be good if we tried something different.
Yeah, exactly. And look, you can understand it if there's barriers in the way in which we do things at church, if there's things that just seem a little bit weird to outsiders, and we think, well, if they turned up to church on the average Sunday morning, they'd run away because we're too weird. Let's remove some of those barriers. You can understand the logic behind it, but certainly some of the research, some of the anecdotal reports we're getting from different parts of the world, people are coming back to church, and in particular, they're looking for some of that distinctiveness. They're looking for the weirdness that Christianity brings.
Precisely, that's exactly right, Andrew. And then there's been some wonderful research on young people coming back to church, particularly in England, in Great Britain, over the last year or two. And the research from going and talking to them is showing actually what I want is not something that's the same, something that I can fit into. It's the weirdness, the oddness. Essentially, I'm looking at this world and thinking, I want something that's fundamentally different from that. And if we lean too much into the similarities, then people will never see those differences. So yeah, exactly.
And I think there's something really important about authenticity in this space, that rather than saying, well, in order to belong to this group, you have to dress like this, you have to behave in a certain way. In order to fit in, you have to be like us. That the authenticity aspect says, you know what, we're all sinners, we're all broken, we're all a little bit weird. I think there was a book called Everyone's Normal Till You Get to Know Them. John Ortberg, I think,
That's right.
wrote
Yes.
that book.
Yeah, indeed.
And if we can be perhaps instead of desperately pretending to be normal, if we can say, hey, this is a place for broken people. This is a place for people who haven't got their spiritual act together. This is what church is for. It's not just for a bunch of people who are putting work into how things are appearing and being judgmental for people who haven't supposedly got their act together.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. You're picking up on exactly the points that I was trying to head towards. And we've got some really good research. You pointed to some research over in England. We're starting to get some really good research coming out of Laidlaw that's sort of pointing in the same direction. So, for example, we had a postgraduate student, Kevin Ward, do some research on 5 or 6 churches that were really had done a great job of emphasizing mission. And he looked at some of the common stories that had come across from all of those different churches. And the kinds of things that you're pointing to are exactly those things. They all have leaders that have explicitly rejected trying to fit into the culture and deliberately trying to be distinct from it.
Yeah.
They've deliberately chosen focus on relationships so that church is not something that you can come into and go out of without anybody actually meeting you or knowing you.
Yeah.
You have to. You can't be a stranger when you go to these kinds of churches. And the third thing that they've focused on is this idea of accountability. Sometimes you can go to church and come out and nobody cares whether you change or you're different or you're transformed or anything like that.
Yeah,
Well, these churches have deliberately pointed in a different direction. And it's in sort of these, it's like saying, this isn't just for anyone. There are expectations if you come here and you need to act a particular way. It's not the superficial kind of stuff like how you dress or those kinds of things, but it's the really tangible stuff of, are you actually evidencing more of a Christ-like lifestyle because you're coming along to church?
Yeah.
And I think perhaps these kinds of things, rather than lowering the bars, actually raising the bars to entry, maybe something that's worthwhile exploring as a church together here in New Zealand.
Part of the situation we find ourselves in, because I suppose Western culture has been so shaped by Christian values and millennia of Christian culture to an extent. I know some other thinkers on this topic have said it's become like the air we breathe, and so that we don't notice it. But actually, in order for the church to really make a difference, it does need to be more distinctive from the culture, that actually the church not going in the same direction as society may be great news for the gospel.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, I think that's almost exactly the right point. And you have a look at the times in history when the church was, the most effective, when it did its best job. It wasn't when it was at the center of society. It was actually when it was sort of slightly on the outside. And the church, I guess, in New Zealand and in the Western world has for so long been at the center of society. It's hard for us, I think, to be able to work out, well, what does it mean to be able to live on the outskirts of society, to not be the influential people that we used to be? And actually, this is where we can really learn from our brothers and sisters in the majority world who live in a different kind of way. And we can use the insights that they have and bring them back to our culture and our understanding. And so learning from them is it's important.
And of course, again, it seems ironic, it seems counterintuitive, but parts of the world where the church has the least influence on society and culture, this is where the church is growing. This is where the Spirit of God is doing amazing things. Greg, thank you so much for running with the metaphor and leaning into the weird and doing an interview with me. I mean, it looks like some back alley behind Laidlaw.
I'm at the freight entrance at Laidlaw at the moment, so it is a little bit of weird. But I'm pleased to say Laidlaw is still standing, and we haven't burned down. So all these things are positive.
Well,
Andrew.
yeah, that's a sign of God's providence and not judgment against you. But hey, thanks for leaning into the weird, and thanks for joining us. Laidlaw.ac.nz, of course, a place to go if you wanted to go deeper in your understanding of life and faith. Thanks for what you do. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Andrew. Lovely to be here.
Hey, thanks very much for joining us in the Rhema studio. Thanks very much for watching the interview. It's kind of nice to have an audience, actually. And if you did like what you watched, then do give us a like, do give us the thumbs up. And if you'd like to see more interviews like that one, or perhaps even better, subscribe and those interviews will come straight to you. Don't forget to turn on your notifications, and we'll see you in the next one. Cheers.